he was alive, he had no place to live. And yet, looking at any map of the world today, you will be reminded about this man. We have no idea what he looked like. No paintings, drawings, statues of any kind. Yet this man and his followers became the most frequent subjects of art in the world. On the day after his death, it looked as if he might not even leave a small impact on world history. But instead, his impact on human history only grew with time. He did not loudly demonstrate to defend his movement in the spirit of a rising political star or a military leader. He never held an office. He never led an army. And yet his vision of life continues to haunt and challenge humanity. He never married, but his treatment of women led to the formation of a movement that was so congenial to women that they would join in record numbers. And children, as well, would be thought of differently because of him. He never wrote a book. Yet his call to love God with one's mind would lead to a community with such reverence for learning that in time, the movement he started would raise libraries and would insist on universal literacy. Why? Because he told his followers to enable every person in the world to learn. And John Ortberg captures these truths beautifully when he says, and I quote, "His influence has swept over the history of the world like a comet, bringing inspiration to art, science, education, government, medicine." He taught humans about dignity and compassion, forgiveness and hope. And who is this man that the choir just sang about and of whom I speak? Of course, it is Jesus of Nazareth, the Christ, the Son of the living God. So this morning, our question before us is, how in the world did Jesus' movement have this kind of impact on human history? And I'm going to tell you the answer right from the start. And then we're going to grapple with it all the way through. The answer is the common vocation that we share in Christ. All who follow Jesus share this common purpose, to bless and to serve others. Listen now to Mark chapter 10, verses 35 to 45. These are Jesus' instructions to his disciples about this common purpose. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came forward to him and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." And he said to them, "What is it you want me to do for you?" They said to him, "Grant us to sit on your right hand and one on your left in your glory." But Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or to be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with?" They replied, "We are able." Then Jesus said to them, "The cup that I drink you will drink, and with the baptism with which I am baptized you will be baptized. But to sit on my right hand or at my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared." When the 10 heard of this conversation, they began to be angry with James and John. So Jesus called them together and he said this to them, "You know that among the Gentiles, those whom they recognize as their rulers lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them. But it is not to be so with you. But whomever wishes to be great among you must be your servant. And whomever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all. For the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. This is the word of the Lord. In our sermon series, we are learning about talents. And today, our story of Jesus and his disciples, we find them on a road trip. And they are heading to Jerusalem. And at a rest stop along the way, back in chapter 9, Jesus asked the disciples, "What have you been talking about along the way?" Shamefaced, they did not at that point tell him the truth. For they had been bickering about who was the greatest among them. They had this sense that in Jerusalem, Jesus was going to establish his kingdom. They'd been listening to what he had been saying, but clearly it had not quite all settled in yet. They imagined he would be offering cabinet positions to help lead this kingdom. The Secretary of Education, Secretary of the Treasury and Justice, and so on. Who would be the Vice President? And who would be the Secretary of State? These were important questions. So I wonder, did any of you this week get a chance to hear Condoleezza Rice when she was in town? Yeah? I'm sorry I missed that. I heard it was quite a special gathering. I had the joy of listening to her read her own book that is called No Higher Honor. It's available on CDs at the library. It's pretty terrific. Something that I learned from listening to this book is that the Secretary of State is the most senior cabinet position. It has something to do with Thomas Jefferson having been the first Secretary of State. Here's one of the times that it matters. When the secretaries, the cabinet of the president, all line up to file into a place, like the House chamber for the State of the Union address, because the Secretary of State is the most senior, that cabinet leader goes first. All right? Protocol like that has always been important in Washington and in Jerusalem. And this is why the disciples were arguing among themselves. Who was going to go first and second and so on? The opportune moment for Jesus to nip this in the bud comes when the sons of Zebedee approach him with their very specific request. One to sit on his right, the other to sit on his left, the positions of highest honor. Fine, James and John. You want honor? Do as I do. Imitate me, Jesus says. Give your lives away. And eventually, they did. Today we gather here in this Christian church because we share something in common with James and John and the other disciples. Our glory, our greatness, just like theirs, is found in service to others. Living large by living small. This past week, I ran across a Java sleeve as I was holding my very hot coffee. Perhaps you're familiar with this trend at Starbucks to quote inspirational thoughts from Oprah Winfrey. Well, a favorite commentator of mine, his name is Drew Dick. He is an editor for Leadership Journal. He added these little edits. So the Java sleeve originally says, "Your life is big. Keep reaching." And this Christian editor, a commentator on popular culture, grabs his little marker and adds, "Your life is small. Keep serving." Very much in keeping with our text today. And I have to applaud this editor's creativity for this helpful reminder that while the world pumps us up to be big and reaching, Jesus reminds us our glory is found in being small and a servant of all. Okay, I couldn't resist. I went back for another cup of coffee the next day. And here's the Java sleeve. The only courage you ever need is the courage to live the life you want. Oprah Winfrey, right? That's what our culture says to us. With a little editing, we get a little closer to the point of today's text. The only courage you ever need is the courage to sacrifice the life you want. Our life is meant to bless, as the Genesis passage reminds us, and to serve others. In the early 1990s, gang violence in the part of East Los Angeles called Boyle Heights involved 8 gangs in conflict with one another in the area of the Dolores Mission Catholic Church. Killings and injuries happened every day. Women from this community, in the midst of this horror, came together and read the story of Jesus, and they prayed together. One night, electrified by the text, they began to identify with the parallels between Jesus' story and their own. And that night, they left their huddle in the basement of the church, and these 70 courageous women began to walk between the neighborhoods of Boyle Heights, one after another. They brought food, guitars, and their talent to love and to serve others. Eventually, they would sit down and eat chips and salsa and drink Cokes with gang members, sometimes singing traditional songs together, and this so disoriented the gangs. This was so disruptive to their pattern of behavior that the war zone went silent. Each night, the mothers continued to walk. And by non-violently intruding and interrupting, they broke what was called the rules of war. The old script of retaliation and escalating violence was challenged and changed. And it's no accident that the women called these treks from neighborhood to neighborhood, they called them love walks. As the relationship between the women and the gang members grew, the kids eventually shared their stories with their new friends. Anguish over lack of jobs, police brutality, and rage over the hopelessness of poverty was the landscape of their life. Together with the women, here's what they've done. They developed a tortilla factory and a bakery, a child care center, a job training program, a class on conflict resolution techniques, and a school for further learning, and a neighborhood group to monitor and report police behavior, and much more. James Bryan Smith does a great job describing this in his book, The Good and Beautiful Life. Love walks are an act of courage, and this led to the blessing and the service of others in need on the margins, youth in need of skills and jobs, and most importantly, someone to notice their pain and to offer help. To be the first, Jesus says, serve. Serve well. Serve long. Notice what's happening around you. Imitate me, is what Jesus says, and when you do, act as I do, you serve me. And that is what the followers of Jesus have been doing for 2,000 years, right here in Spokane and all around the world, noticing the needs in their neighborhoods and responding. And we simply call this our common vocation, the one talent that we all share in common, our call to service. Whatever our field of expertise might be, wherever it is that we find ourselves employed, whether in administration or in barns or in education, or healthcare, or sports fields, or orphan care, or problem solving, hospitality, law, the care of creation. This is your list from last week. Does it sound familiar? Yep. However it is that we serve in our day-to-day lives, we serve the cause of Christ in our common vocation and acts of service, impacting the world around us. Service as Jesus described it to his disciples on their journey to Jerusalem would one day be the hallmark of the church, our church, and every church. Now, this morning's message is not a fancy scheme to get you sign up to do a bunch of things, okay? You can relax. We have an awful lot of people around here employing their incredible talents in many, many ways. My hope this morning is different than that. I hope that you leave here today with a keen sense that your role in the mission of God in Christ matters. I would like to invite you to imagine yourself serving at a church, this church or any church around the world. Your job is to serve as a greeter, to welcome people to the church. It's quite likely someone will say, what is a church? And I offer this video as a possible response.
With some pews,
A piano?
and stained glass?
Or is it something more?
2,000 years ago, the church was born.
It wasn't made up of the famous, the rich, or the powerful.
It was made up of everyday people who passionately believed in the message of Jesus.
It was the beginning of a revolution of love and freedom that would change the world forever.
In 369 AD, the church built the first hospital.
As a place to care for those who cannot care for themselves. Today, the church is the largest single provider of healthcare in history.
The church was the first to stand up for the rights of children, creating the first and largest orphanage system in the world.
100 out of the first 110 universities in America
Were founded as Christian institutions.
Places like Harvard,
Dartmouth,
Yale,
And Princeton.
much of the world's greatest art,
architecture, literature,
and music has been shaped by the church.
But the impact of the church isn't just ancient history.
Today, the church is stronger than ever.
And continues to impact every corner of the world.
over 300,000 churches in America,
And almost 5 million churches around the world stand ready to be instruments of change, to do what governments could never do.
Every day, the church brings food and fresh water to millions of people across the world.
It has a renewed passion to help widows and orphans.
And fights to free slaves in every part of the world.
It stands ready as a first responder on the scene to provide relief for victims of disaster.
The ripple of Jesus' impact can be clearly seen and felt in the church today.
And it's made up of people like me and you.
Today, you didn't just come to a building.
You came to a revolution 2,000 years in the making.
The world is facing as much trouble as ever.
But we are not afraid. We were created for such a time as this.
We will continue to do what we've always done.
Proclaim the message of Jesus.
To help a world that needs him so desperately.
welcome
Welcome.
Welcome.
Welcome to church.